Hello and welcome back to Favorite Things. This is a part 2 video of my comparison between the Omega Railmaster trilogy and my original Omega Ranchero. If you want to take a look at my part 1 video, there's a link right there. This is basically just kind of some additional thoughts. I want to start with a brief overview between these two models. As part of the iconic trilogy of professional purpose-specific timepieces, the Railmaster was built to offer precise and reliable timekeeping while withstanding the ever-increasing presence of magnetic fields that came with the advent of modernization. The Ranchero, which was offered shortly afterwards, was often referred to as the fourth musketeer of the trilogy and is a more simplified version, made more for everyday use and not as purpose-specific in its design and construction as the Railmaster, Seamaster, and Speedmaster. Now, one thing I do want to mention about my Railmaster is that when it was new, the polished lugs were very shiny and overall the watch was kind of blingy. I was hoping that with some daily wear it would dull a little bit, but since this is 3/16 stainless steel, it doesn't scratch much with daily wear, and so I decided to soften up those highly polished lugs with just a little bit of brushing, light brushing. And so I'm much happier with the look of it now, and it matches the faux patina, tropic dial, and retro styling that came with this watch. If you looked at my part 1 video, I had the Railmaster on its original bracelet, and I had a couple of gripes of that bracelet. Now I have it on a Forstner Contemporary Flat Link. This is the bracelet it should have originally come with. It fits well to the case, it has a nice taper, a great clasp, and a very good balance between modern and vintage, and it's totally adjustable. It has the perfect amount of heft and functionality, and has thicker links than the original Forstner, and it tapers from 19 millimeters to 16 millimeters, has a double push button milled clasp, still has this edge trim. Unfortunately, there are no stretch links that the original Forstner flat link bracelet comes with. The original bracelet tapers, but just barely, from 19 millimeters to 18 millimeters, and then it jumps to a whopping 20 millimeters at the clasp. In my part 1 video, my Ranchero was on a Uncle Seiko 1035 flat link bracelet, but now I've put it on this wonderful all original Omega 1035 from 1971, and it's very comfortable and it has that vintage feel. It's got the rounded links that no other aftermarket bracelet seems to be able to recreate. And if you look at the links here, they have these stretch links that are single link stretch links versus the original bracelet that would have come on this Ranchero, the model 70770, which has these double stretch links and is a little bit more awkward looking. Here's a video from my friend in Japan named Hiro, who I consider is an Omega bracelet expert. And also different is the clasp design. This is a more modern clasp. The original 7077 has a shorter clasp. And this overhanging Omega symbol. My Ranchero is not an everyday wearer, and so when I do wear it, I enjoy the wearing experience when it is coupled with a vintage bracelet, which is still in decent condition. So with these alternate bracelet options, we've got new weights here. So 120, about 123.8 with the Forstner Contemporary Flat Link and the Ranchero on the original 1035. We've got 60.6, so you can compare that to my previous video for the weights. And again, the Railmaster has a 19 millimeter lug width, whereas the Ranchero has 18 millimeter lug width. They both look great on straps. Seconds hand. The Ranchero is actually a little bit more visible since it has a white painted hand. A lot of times the white paint will have worn off, and so they may actually come to you with just kind of fully chromed hands. They originally had white painted hands like this one. The Railmaster has a needle seconds hand with no loom. Could be difficult to see in poor lighting, or if you're like me and you need to wear reading glasses to see things up close. Not to mention, I love the countersunk subdial of the Ranchero. There's a less common version of the Ranchero that has center seconds hand, and that's the 2996. And unfortunately, that also has needle seconds hand with no loomed pip. And so that could be just as difficult to read as the Railmaster. Let's talk about case proportions. I would say that the Ranchero has slightly too big of a dial in relation to the case, and the Railmaster has too small of a dial in relation to the case, with just a lot more metal between the dial and the edges of the case. Too bad there isn't a modern Omega that is between these two. The closest thing might be the Aquaterra Railmaster in 36mm that I reviewed previously. I also want to make mention of the Laurier Falcon 3, but that's more of a Railmaster and Explorer mix, although I do like the 36mm size. More on the dial. The Railmaster dial is flat versus the Ranchero dial, which is slightly curved or domed. Neither of these ever had loomed numbers. I know that the faux patina or faux tina has been kind of controversial with regard to many modern watches that are trying to have vintage vibes. But in this particular case, this is definitely not one of my criticisms of the trilogy models that Omega released in 2017. I like the pale orange color, and it really completes the overall aesthetic for me, since I associate these iconic pieces with a slight ochre or tan colored from the aged radium paint. Although I do want to acknowledge that this orange color, as appropriate as I think it is to these vintage pieces, it is not an original design idea, as is the orange color used in, say, the Omega Genève Admiralty that I also recently reviewed. Now I want to talk a little bit about vintage versus modern, and this is not exactly an apples to apples comparison since I don't have an original Railmaster 2914. So this is kind of a double comparison. The advantages of modern versus vintage. Yes, with modern, you lose some of the charm, but also you avoid some of the pitfalls. Let's talk about them one by one. Number one, waterproof. The Railmaster is 60mm water resistant, and okay, it's not a diver, but it won't get water damage with daily use and light submersion. The Ranchero, although it's somehow passed the waterproof test at its last service, I don't even want to get it close to water, and it has a snap-on case back. That's not a screw-in case back. Service. With the modern Railmaster, service costs are not cheap, but the parts are available, and even if you need a dial change like I had when my crystal broke, unfortunately, parts are available and none of the originality is compromised. Whereas with a vintage piece, parts are not as easily available, and the ones that are available, like crowns, are often not the same parts of the originals, which means you either have an all-original watch that you're afraid to wear, or a more water-resistant watch that you can wear daily, but not necessarily with all the original parts. Some cases with a repainted dial, unfortunately. With a vintage piece, you also have to choose your watchmaker very carefully. For example, I service my vintage Omegas with a watchmaker in Canada, and so I have to deal with insurance, shipping, customs, the whole deal. And let's talk about radioactivity of the radium dial and hands. Here I want to reference a great YouTube video about a lecture on vintage watches and radiation from the Horological Society of New York. Unfortunately, as perfect as the Ranchero is, I don't wear it as much because of this phobia for radiation. I hope I'm wrong, but the jury is still out debating. Radium is strange. You can see the lume at night, and if you look closely, the markers kind of flash and pulsate. Or maybe it's just the way our eye interprets the luminescence. I'm not sure, but it does make me a little nervous. So again, there is no perfect watch. A modern reissue of the Ranchero would be really super close, and if there was a manual wound movement like the original Ranchero, I would be really tempted to pick one up. Maybe it would look a little bit like this. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.